Very bad pension.
Hello, good evening. Hello, welcome to the Building Centre. My name is John Bonning. I'm the Commercial Director here at the Building Centre. Just before we start, a quick bit of housekeeping. Please can you ensure all mobile phones are switched off? And we've got no planned fire drills this evening. So if you hear a ringing, please exit out the doors that you came in and the Building Centre team will take you out the building. We're delighted to have such a large turnout this evening. This is now, I believe, our 13th, 14th talk of the Retrofit 23 series. Retrofit 23, hopefully you've had the opportunity to see the exhibition upstairs in the main gallery. It's focused on residential retrofitting and residential retrofitting at scale. I personally tonight am going to keep my intro very brief because we have an expert panel of speakers on the subject of urban heat and how we reduce its impact. There will be a Q&A session at the end, so please keep your questions, hold your questions until the end of all the speakers have a chance to speak. And there will be drinks afterwards, so please do join us and continue the conversation after the actual formal event. For those of you who are not familiar with the Building Centre, we are an independent forum for the built environment. We're a non-for-profit organisation. We sit below the Built Environment Trust, providing educational and cultural facilities for both the public and the professional person in the industry. So all our events are free to attend, and we rely on the support of our small dedicated team and our sponsors that make these events actually possible. And in that regard, I would like to thank Arup for being our principal sponsor and guide very much on the whole retrofit story that we've gone through. We've got a couple more events next week. Do keep an eye on the website. All the events are uploaded onto our website, buildingcentre.co.uk. We will then have a small break for August during the summer period, and then we come back again in September, running about 2 or 3 events every single week, all the way through to early October. So I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our panel of speakers this evening, and also a big thank you to Arup for their sponsorship of the event and the drinks tonight, I should add, as well. So I'm going to pass you over to our host for the evening, Becci Taylor, who's Director of Arup and is responsible for their retrofitting at scale business. Becci.
Thank you, John. So welcome everyone to Retrofit Meets Urban Heat. I'm unable to use the clicker. I'm Becci Taylor. As he said, I lead Arup's Retrofit at Scale business, which aims to bring much of our firm and as much of the industry as possible together to solve the challenge of making our built environment ready for the future at pace and at scale. I am genuinely obsessed with the systems approach to retrofit as a multi-benefit action to support our health and that of the planet. I have background in building physics and human comfort, so as sponsor of this fantastic exhibition, was super keen to have an event on heat and retrofit. Responding to urban heat is particularly urgent here in London. It can, however, also be elegant if we can mitigate further climate change while adapting to that which we've already caused. Arup has been working on urban heat in London for at least 20-25 years. Our most live projects are looking into how we can use existing data to assess property vulnerability and work supporting research into sleep comfort criteria. We recently published our work for Annette and the GLA on our panel on the opportunity for cool roofs retrofit in London. And what I love most about this work is it highlights the benefit when you move from the individual to the collective action on heat. So if you cool your own roof surface or add shading, you'll improve the comfort in your home. Plus, you can show off to your neighbours, and they might do it too. But if we all were to do this, it would be so much more impactful. Reflective roofs alone could reduce London city temperatures by more than 3 degrees, and urban heat island by 23% at least. And this could be much more combined with greening and shade, working towards the really important commons of a cooler city. So thank you all for coming. And I'll pass you over now to Polly, our chair for the night, and our really fantastic panellists from whom I really hope you're going to learn and be inspired to take that individual and collective action. Thank you.
Hello. Good evening, everyone. Thanks, Becky, for that intro, and thank you, John, as well. And thanks to all our speakers for turning up safely. I know some of you had some challenges getting here this evening. So my name's Polly Turton. I'm an environmental and health consultant at Arup, and I'm particularly interested in the issue of urban heat because it's that overlap in that Venn diagram between climate change and health and equity. In the next hour and a half or so, maybe a bit less now, we're going to cover pretty much the past, present and future of urban heat, the why, the when, the where and the who, and the what and the how of retrofit to reduce urban heat risk in homes and also community buildings, because whilst Retrofit 23 is about that deep retrofit at scale of homes, this is about our communities as a whole. And we're going to look at how this plays out at the global, national and city scale, but also the neighbourhood, home and human scale. There's a real sense of urgency around these issues, if you weren't already aware, and the actions required to address them. You know, last summer, 2022, we experienced 40 degrees Celsius in England. It was a first, a bit of a wake-up call. Last month was the UK's hottest ever June on record, and last year, 60,000 people died across Europe during that hot weather, and 4,000 of those people were actually in the UK. And as I think Annette will be touching on, a level 4 heatwave alert was triggered in England for the first time ever, which requires an emergency response. And only a couple of weeks ago, the world's hottest day was ever recorded. I don't know if you saw that in the news. So, it's happening and it's urgent that we address it, urban heat. I also have 3 provocations which I'm hoping the speakers and that you all sort of consider over the next hour or so. The first is this: we ignore the advice of the Committee on Climate Change at our peril. The number of deaths, the level of danger, discomfort and disruption caused by urban heat in the UK is frankly unacceptable given the resources, the knowledge, the kind of technical expertise we have in this country, in my opinion. We have enough evidence to act. We now need to be ambitious and urgently shift our focus to the delivery of effective adaptation at scale. My second provocation is, and this is for discussion, London is a 20-degree city. We're okay at about 20-ish degrees Celsius in London. No one's suffering from cold homes and fuel poverty. No one's suffering from overheating and cool poverty. We're not equipped to cope in terms of the design of our buildings and public realm and infrastructure with anything above that, really. Things start going wrong at 25 degrees in London, let alone 30, 35 or 40. See what you think. I'm happy to kind of take alternative views on these points. The third provocation is that retrofit to reduce urban heat risk isn't actually a design and engineering issue. It's a public health and health inequalities issue. And I think what we need to do is put urban heat up there with air quality in terms of making that high-profile public health campaign and taking that public health approach to addressing it. But again, I work for a design and engineering firm, so I'm conscious there may be alternative views on that point. But anyway, that's enough from me. Let's hear what our expert panel of speakers have to say, and we really do have a great collection of speakers this evening. First up, we have Sue Rofe, Professor Emeritus of Architectural Engineering from Heriot-Watt University. So over to you, Sue.
Thanks very much indeed. We were told last year at a conference I organised that we should be designing for 45 degrees centigrade by 2030. Now, the thing is that happens when you get to temperatures like that is the system breaks down, so you get blackouts and so on. But the quickest way to dump heat out of a building, like dumping viral load, is to simply open a window at some temperatures. You've got to know when to open and when to close them. So I thought a quick introduction to what actual thermal comfort is, and not engineering comfort, which was invented by the American air conditioning industry in the 1950s. Real comfort for real people in real buildings. So we led the world in this research, Michael Humphreys and Fergus Nicol, And what we have here is a simple reality that the neutral temperature or comfort temperature for people in all different climates changes with the temperature. So the hotter the climate, the more comfortable you are at higher temperatures, and vice versa. Now, this is all in a process to keep we're all animals wherever we come from in the world as human beings. And our core temperature is 37, whether you're in Siberia or Africa or anywhere. And we have these wonderful thermoregulatory systems to keep us safe. When things start to go wrong, there are many actions we can take to restore our comfort. And we're all, how many people here in this room have felt really hot in their own homes last summer? It's really, this is a problem. I mean, when will I get ill? When will I die? You know, a lot of people do die in their own homes. Look, the adaptive principle of thermal comfort is that people adapt to those temperatures they normally occupy, and if they're not comfortable, they act to improve their comfort. And these are the types of systems, I mean, involuntary actions. You get too cold, you shiver. You get too hot, you sweat. That's the physiological responses. And then you've got the voluntary ones, and I can look around here and see who's really hot and who's not hot. It's not only the clothes you're wearing, but your postures. You know, you are making involuntary actions all the time to become more comfortable. You use clothing, you change your posture, you'll change from the hot side of a room to the cool side of the room in the shade, or change rooms. You'll turn environmental controls. You'll shut the curtain or turn up the thermostat or something like that. And if you get really hot or cold, you'll change what you're doing. You'll slow down if you're too hot, and you'll speed up if you're not. But this is really interesting because the air conditioning industry has sold us this myth that you're only comfortable between 20 and 24, and if you're really lucky, 26 degrees centigrade. But imagine yourself on holiday, you're on a bed by the pool in the shade, you're wearing your board shorts or your bikini, there's no real breeze, and your body is in a thermoneutral zone. It's not sweating, it's not shivering, it's in a metabolically stable state. You can keep your core temperature of 37, and the temperature of that thermoneutral zone is roughly 27 to 33. So that's quite high, isn't it? So why are we cooling buildings down to 20 degrees centigrade? It's because it was determined by an industry that made money selling machines to cool you down. But that's a reality. So I'm talking about you in your own homes, right? When are you going to get ill and so on? It depends on what you're adapted to. Comfort is a cultural construct influenced by climate. And people across the world adapt to very different temperatures in very different ways. If you live in Pakistan or India, yeah, these are actual surveys we did in Pakistan with Mike and Fergus. And these are different cities. You've got Multan in the hot desert. You've got Saidu Sharif up in the mountains, getting up to the Himalayas. You've got Karachi. You've got Islamabad. You've got Quetta up on the high plateau. And people in those different geographical regions adapt to very different temperatures in the buildings they occupy, yeah? Which is, they adapt, yeah. If you go to France, France is rather interesting. You can see from, this is the data, these are surveys where people have said whether they're comfortable or not in different temperatures. In France, they heat their buildings in winter and they naturally ventilate them in summer. That's the data angle, that adaptation data angle, you know. So the hotter it is outside, the higher your comfort temperature. In Portugal, it's very different again. In Portugal, they don't actually heat in winter much. I mean, occasionally you have what I call in Persian corsi. You have a little stove under a blanket, you know. And that goes from Japan, kotatsu, through Corsi and to Brasero, something like that. And they don't heat rooms. It's about heating or cooling people. And that, again, is going to be a feature of the future. In Britain, we're all over the place. We really don't know. But if you go to Sweden, or you go to many American buildings, or Denmark, or they control their temperatures very closely. So they live in sort of like 20 to 26. So these are the temperatures, the Swedish temperatures, the American air conditioning industry temperatures that are exported to buildings around the world, right? But what about taking those temperatures to, they don't indicate how comfortable you'll be at home. If you gradually, if the heat's building up, you can be quite comfortable at 28. Has anybody measured a high temperature in their house and thought, I'm comfortable in this? Yeah, go on. What temperature?
About 28, 29.
Yeah, 28. And you thought, this is all right. Did you have a breeze through an open window?
Just had a ceiling fan.
Ceiling fan. Anybody else? 28, 29? Yeah, we've got another one here. Yeah, you can be perfectly comfortable. Even Mike Humphreys, English born and bred, we took him to Pakistan in Islamabad, and he suddenly sat in the bed one day and said, oh my God, it's 32 and I'm comfortable. So it's possible. And around the world, you've got all these comfort clouds that Fergus gets from the data. So you can be anything. You are fine anywhere between 10 and 35 if you're adapted. Above 35, it's getting difficult. You're getting a bit close to the 37, yeah? And at the higher temperatures, you need good air movement so you can sweat. But you've got many different ways. When you're thinking about refurbishment, I want to give you one key thing which you don't often hear about. It's thermal landscaping of buildings. So in all the buildings you refurbish, make sure you've got a climate refuge for the heat and a climate refuge for the cool. So you've got a room. It's probably, some of you have gone from sleeping upstairs to in the real heat to sleeping downstairs. Yeah, because you're harvesting the right temperatures to stay comfortable safely. So for a comfortable building, you need a well-behaved internal temperature. You don't need a sort of psychotic temperature that goes up and down, which a lot of modern lightweight overglazed buildings are. So you can get that by buffering. So here's a north-facing room. You've got a central living. This is Dammam in Saudi Arabia. And you've got a southwest bedroom with 2 windows. So, you know, that's going to be impossible to occupy, really. So in terms of overheating, the HVAC limits are about 20 to 26. Acceptable adaptive comfort limits go from 10 to 35. So that's safe limits if you're adapted to those temperatures, yeah? You don't take an Eskimo and put them in 35. And for your design, when you're doing your retrofit, get a pencil and a piece of paper and get a plan. You know, where is your thermal core, your mass to stabilize that temperature? How are you going to put in the shading, where are the cool pools of air outside the building? And where are the hot pools? You know, how do you harvest different thermal reservoirs for different times of year? And of course, remember that in the future, all buildings will have to have opening windows in the shorter or longer term. So put them in now when you're retrofitting. I'm seeing some skeptical faces here. Just to introduce you to my latest, you might have know my famous rear view, the Oxford Eco House. That's the first solar roof in Britain on my Oxford house, 1995. I've just put in a new shade over it. So put in the adaptive opportunities so you can add different defenses against temperatures of 45. So thank you very much. I hope that's useful.
Thank you, Sue. Yeah. Thank you very much, Sue. I think that was a lot about the why we're here and looking at these issues. And next we have Sachin Bhatt, who is the Director of Adaptation Resilience at C40 Cities. He's going to be looking at a bit at the global scale, the where really, of this issue.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sachin Boite. I'm the director for C40 Cities. First of all, I'm going to start talking about heat as an urban issue. And thank you, Sue, for reminding us the cultural aspects of heat, which is, in some ways, also applies to cities, in that we've forgotten how to design cities. A lot of older cities were designed with shading principles and surfaces and walkable cities that were that also were designed for thermal comfort. With that in mind, one of my first introductions to the impacts of climate change on humans was this diagram by Joe Silva from Arup. I used to work for Arup as well. And a systems approach, as Becci mentioned, which refers to the idea that climate change impacts are not only felt directly from the elements to people, but also through our built environment. And that applies to heating, to flooding, to droughts. So and cities have a major role to play in that, and that's going to be the theme of my conversation. It's just a little bit zooming out onto cities. And as we know, cities face urban heat island effect, but I would argue that modern cities, car-dominated cities with a lot of paving, hard paving, parking lots, a lot of tarmac, they're designed to overheat. That's the provocation. And I think we need to undesign them. We need to turn back the time on that and really look at cities that are designed for shading, for thermal comfort, but also look to nature and solutions that can help us turn that design decision into one that is comfortable, healthy, and driven by thermal comfort. Now, there's a lot of data that I'm going to dive into, which is why I'm going to have to look at my notes. Spoiler alert, heat is a killer. So in C40 Cities, the research has shown us that currently 200 million people living in more than 350 cities face summer highs of over 35 degrees Celsius. And with the increasing frequency of heat waves, from 350 cities, we're likely to be looking at 970 cities by 2050. So a good way to think about it is 3 times more people will be exposed to very uncomfortable, severe heat in a span of less than 17, 18 years. So that's and at the moment, a third of the world's population experiences fatal heat extremes. And what that means is over 20 days of extreme heat in a year. And as Becci mentioned, Europe's 2022 event, more than 20,000 people died in Europe. And just in England and Wales alone, that was more than 2,000 people who died. So what are cities doing to cope with this? So we have a few cities in our network. Phoenix, for example, is a leader in cool pavements. They've just completed about 120 kilometers of cool pavements, and they're doing it in a very serious way. They're looking at cool pavements as they've really tested it. They've partnered with the local university. They're measuring the temperature before and after. They're testing different products, and it's one of our kind of network successes as well. It's an initiative that they started. They learned from Paris, they learned from London, they learned from Rotterdam, and they're transforming the cities to become a bit cooler. And sorry, the image on the right is an interesting one. It's a heat sensor and a humidity sensor that goes around the city automatically and measures the temperature and humidity. And as I mentioned, in cities, it's all about surfaces. It's about how surfaces absorb and reflect heat. I won't go into too much detail. I think other speakers will do that. But I think one thing that we've seen work quite well in cities is when cities apply regulations within their building code, and they make it a requirement rather than just an incentive and it's enshrined in code to include cool surfaces, green roofs, etc. in their buildings. And Tel Aviv, for example, has taken it one step further. They actually have shading requirements for different shading requirements for different types of buildings, and that's a really great way to think about heat. It's not the same standards don't apply to every building, to every use, and they've really taken a very detailed approach to this. And in Barcelona, a slightly different approach, and it's a more urban approach, and it responds to the question: is it better to protect people within buildings or outside buildings? And what Barcelona is doing is depaving their streets. I think they've committed to reducing a third of their streets and turn them into parks, into green spaces, increasing green cover to increase thermal comfort in cities. But how do we work with cities? These are cities that are part of our network, and particularly one of the networks we manage is called Cool Cities Network, and it's, besides having the coolest name, Cool Cities, it's also a network that really is very active, and it's about 39 cities experiencing extreme heat as a big driver for development, sharing solutions, peer-to-peer learning, and really looking at each other for leadership, as well as the sort of getting a helping hand in the political commitments. So C40, just zooming out, is a network of about 100 mayors, and the Cool Cities is in some ways a sub-network within the bigger network. And what the Cool Cities Network does is support cities to do heat mapping, to make emergency plans, to include heat considerations in long-term planning, as well as identifying, sharing heat solutions, provide technical assistance to implement the heat solutions, as well as, I think, mainly one of our main purposes is peer-to-peer network sharing. And lastly, we do publications where we kind of help mayors and cities raise the voice on heat. And it's one of the things I think we do a lot about heat is really communicate about it, to make the science base known, to make solutions known, to help monitor and evaluate the effectiveness of solutions. Of course, I think some of the solutions are applicable and replicable at scale, but some are very specific, and I think we try to balance that. That's it from me.
Thank you, Sachin. That was fantastic. So a nice segue then into the role of mayors. We now have Annette Figueiredo, who is the Principal Policy Officer for Urban Heat at the Greater London Authority, working closely with the mayor's team on tackling urban heat risk in London. So over to you, Annette.
Thanks, Polly. Hands up all those who've heard of the Mayor of London. Great. Hands up those who know the name of the Mayor of London. Fantastic. Great. Good. We're on a good start. As Polly has said, my name is Annette Figueiredo, and I work at the GLA working on heat policy. So I have a challenge to do this in 3 minutes. That's the instruction we were given. We all have the challenge of adapting to climate change. So I'm going to talk about the context, challenges and opportunities, and then I'm going to be doing the what. What has the mayor done? What is the mayor doing? What more the mayor has to do? So, in the context of climate change, we have a cocktail of challenges, but we also have opportunities. So not everything is doom and gloom. The challenge is threefold. The evidence and science is clear. UK climate projections, 2018, have informed us we're going to see a greater chance of London seeing hotter, drier summers, warmer, wetter winters, and Sue has already outlined that. We've experienced that. Add to that, London is an old city. We have aging buildings, population growth, an ageing population. We have a young population, but alongside that, ageing population. Very little investment in adaptation, very little investment in retrofit. Our buildings weren't designed for the present climate. Add to that, people living longer with comorbidities. So this is very much about a health issue as well as an environmental issue. And if you add to that, the stream running through all this is disproportionate impacts. So in the context of heat is going to disproportionately impact certain groups, older, younger. But in addition to that, people with existing health conditions, and then add to that poorer communities. And in our current context, we've also got an economic crisis. So that's quite a cocktail of challenges we've got to face in the context of climate change. But here are the opportunities. If we adapt, our cities become greener, they become cooler, they become safer. London becomes a city where people want to live, where they want to work, where they want to contribute, and it becomes a city where people want to invest. We don't have these supply chain disruptions like we've seen in kind of during the heatwave scenarios. And most importantly, we create a safety net where our vulnerable communities are protected. So here is the what. What is the Mayor doing? There are 26 actions under 4 headings. The Mayor is protecting Londoners. He's making new and existing homes and workplaces fit for purpose. He's cooling transport, and he's improving London's public realm. Now, don't get me wrong, he's not doing this all himself. We're doing this together in partnership. So under protecting Londoners, 9 actions. The Mayor communicates with Londoners when there's a level heat alert, and that's usually around the level 3 and level 4. So last year when we had the level 4 heat alert, the Mayor informed Londoners well in advance that we could expect a level 4 heat alert and that we should prepare for this and the steps that should be taken to cool ourselves, cool our buildings, but again, more importantly, is how to look after vulnerable people, so our neighbours, for example, our communities, etc. He's established cool spaces. So during the level 4 heat alert last year, there were just under 500 cool spaces, indoor and outdoor cool spaces. And during the period of the high heat alert on the 18th, 19th of July, the website hits on the cool spaces site reached 36,000 from a daily average of 2.2 thousand. Now, there's no correlation to suggest that that was the number of people who use the cool spaces, but what it does suggest is that people were interested. They wanted information about how to cool, where to go, how to cool themselves. We've also established cool centres for those sleeping rough. Perhaps the most vulnerable in our community during heatwave are our rough sleepers, people who may have dual diagnoses, mental health and drug addiction, alcohol addiction, who also sleep rough on the streets in very hot spots. So we worked with the boroughs last year to create cool centres for those sleeping rough. We've partnered with City to Sea. There are 4,400 refill points across the city where Londoners and visitors can refill water bottles for free and stay hydrated, and there's also an app. We've established water fountains, partnered with Thames Water and the London Zoological Society to install a network of over 140 drinking water fountains. If you remember, I mentioned the vulnerable communities. So older people in care homes are particularly vulnerable and at risk of death, sadly to say, and those with dementia are even at a higher risk. So we carried out some audits with University College London. We created 5 audits, and the result of that, University College London were able to secure £750,000 to upscale that pilot to do a national programme of audits. And those audits create simple recommendation, low-cost recommendations which care homes can do to make sure that their residents can keep cool and adapt very quickly, because we know that mortality increases the longer the heat wave goes on, and add to that kind of age as a risk factor and illness as a risk factor as well. The really great thing with that project is the Care Quality Commission, which is an impenetrable regulator, as some of you might know, have taken on board addressing climate change in their inspection regime. So that was a real plus as a result of that project. We've created guidance for schools and early years settings. We've worked with Arup on that. Again, simple recommendations, low-cost recommendations, and then the more higher recommendations, more costly recommendations, many of the kind of classic recommendations that you'll be familiar with in terms of kind of green roofs, cool roofs inside the building, trying to kind of rethink about where children come into schools, where they play, etc. We've just partnered with Thames Water and finished a climate resilience schools program where we work with 101 schools, creating adaptation plans in schools which can then be rolled out to other schools across the city. And we've created with Bloomberg the climate risk map for London, which creates data on surface temperature, heat spots, and who is at risk. So there are the 9 actions under protecting Londoners, and I've probably kind of gone well over the 3 minutes already, so I'm going to race through the next few points. The second heading I mentioned is making new and existing homes and workplaces fit for purpose. So we've got the London Plan, and within the London Plan, there are 2 approaches to how we reduce overheating. So for new developments, we have the energy assessment guidance, which explains how to comply with measures to reduce internal overheating risk in line with the London Plan's cooling hierarchy. And our officers look at the applications that come in and they assess mitigation, so zero carbon emission reductions, but they also are looking at heat as well. And then the other point is how we reduce the intensification of the urban heat island. And the Mayor has recently commissioned translational research into what can be done to reduce the impacts of the urban heat island through new developments. We've also got the new housing supply, the Affordable Homes Programme, which introduced 6 sustainable requirements which set minimum standards for sustainability, mirroring the London Plan and the cooling hierarchy. And many of you might know that the Mayor's Affordable Homes Programme has reached its target in terms of social housing, which is a really good plus. But the really added plus to that is we do have these sustainability requirements within. Becci has already alluded to the Roofs Designed to Cool project, so that's out for publication now. We're looking at the next steps in terms of pilot. And that Cool Roofs programme, in addition to what Becci said about combining and how we kind of layer interventions, looks at reflective materials such as coating, tiles and photovoltaic panels to look at really how simple measures can cool a roof. So we didn't really look at green roofs and blue roofs. We've got a plethora of academic research on those types of roofs. This was particularly focusing on the materials that can be used to cool a roof, and then looking at how we can combine that with the retrofit programs that we have at the GLA. So if we've got scaffolding up to kind of make sure that homes are warmer in the winter, let's look at if we can kind of think about how we can also at that same time cool the roofs either through coating, etc. Saves costs, it's a combined approach, and what we actually want to eventually see is warmer homes, cooler homes in London. We know that we face many barriers in terms of climate adaptation and heat, funding being one and regulation being the other. Either we've got weak regulation or too tight regulation. So we have to take an integrated approach, and we work with our energy efficiency programs to make sure that heat is included in those programs. I'm not going to describe these programs because we don't have time, but we have the Retrofit Accelerator Homes Programme, the Local Energy Accelerator Programme, the Innovation Partnership, the Warmer Homes Programme. We've just secured additional funding for the Warmer Homes Programme, and then the Retrofit Accelerator Workplaces. So we're looking at a cross-section of businesses, workplaces, and homes in terms of integrating. When we're doing mitigation, we're also doing overheating as well. The third heading, if you remember, was cooling transport. So the Mayor wants to ensure that Londoners and those who come and visit and do business in London, provide investment into the city, can travel comfortably on the transport network. So TfL has just completed a climate risk assessment that identified more than 300 risks, many of which are related to high temperatures. And it's just launched its first adaptation plan, which is fantastic news. TfL is also trialling a state-of-the-art cooling panel on a disused platform at Holborn Station to test its suitability for reducing temperatures on the deep network. And in the short term, heat risks are managed through TfL's resilience activity. And examples include reviewing resource, introducing speed restrictions, reducing movement of track points, and increased customer information. I have to say that we use resilience and adaptation very loosely. We're very closely aligned. Resilience is our close cousin, if you like, but we're not resilience. We're adaptation, and we're thinking about long term, but we do have to work with resilience as well. And then some double-decker buses include air cooling systems on the upper deck, have open windows to improve air circulation, white roofs and tinted windows to reduce solar gain, and roof and engine insulation to reduce the build-up of heat. Lastly, improving London's public realm, 4 actions. Obviously, the Mayor wants to do everything he can to make sure that London is a nice place to live, work and visit, which includes promoting a city that is heat resilient and comfortable during extreme heat episodes. We also know that when we have extreme heat episodes, the impacts on the economy and worker productivity levels drops. And there's been some research that's done on that in terms of the level 4 heat wave alert that we had last year. So the Mayor has committed to ensure Londoners have access to green spaces within a 10-minute walk of their home. Since 2016, the Mayor has invested over 24 million in green infrastructure and tree planting programs. And these projects are targeted in areas of low canopy cover, high climate risks, such as overheating and poor access to green spaces. We heard about the inequities in terms of access to green spaces during COVID. So greener programs will also help to create and improve green spaces in neighbourhoods. And then following last year's level 4 heat alert, the Mayor pledged 3.1 million for a new tree planting package to protect and future-proof London in response to the impacts of climate change. In addition to this 3.1 million package, the Mayor has also secured 3 million from the government's Urban Tree Challenge Fund to plant almost 8,000 street trees across 22 boroughs. In total, since 2016, the Mayor has funded the planting of over 460,000 trees across London. We know trees take a long time to grow, but they also, when they do mature, they provide shade and shelter. So current programs, very quickly, that was the kind of what has the Mayor done. Current programs, we're piloting heat sensors with University College London. We're working with Arup on a data piece identifying properties vulnerable to heat risks for climate preparedness and prioritisation. We're working on a long-term plan with academics, with boroughs, and with Peabody, I see Chit is here as well, on a heat plan for London. And we're looking at next steps of routes designed to cool, and then we're working with the planners on Urban Heat Island and how we can develop case studies. What more needs to be done? The final point I'm going to make is we need to establish a long-term plan for London. We did 2 workshops last year following the summer heat events, and one of the recommendations was to create a long-term plan for London. We don't have that. Many cities do have that. Phoenix has been identified as a city. New York has that. We need to kind of create a long-term plan for London. We need to lobby government. There's no one single regulator for heat in London. So unlike other sectors, they have the CQC, they have Ofsted, they have Ofgem, they have Ofwat. Heat doesn't have that. And so we need to lobby to make sure that we get funding and that we loosen regulation and we tighten regulation. And then finally, more events like this, more partnership working and more collaborative working. And hopefully I'll stick to time next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I mean, that was a very valuable overview of everything the Mayor's doing, and I look forward to discussing the what else. But now we're moving on to Andy Love, who is the founder, director of Love Design Studios and Shade the UK.
Hiya. I did get told 3 minutes as well, so I took a double espresso beforehand, but I'm kind of past the top of the bell curve now, so apologies in advance. I'm Andy Love. I'm the founder of Shade the UK. It's a non-profit. We're raising awareness of the issues of climate change and how it impacts vulnerable groups. It's quite specific. I've been working in the sustainability industry in the built environment for about 12 years. My frustration was that we were working predominantly on new builds and looking at overheating risk for new development. Actually, because 80% of the buildings have already been built, most of our vulnerable exist in care homes, social housing, hospices, hospitals, and that's where we should be focusing our resilience and adaptability measures. The idea is that we want the UK to be fully adapted to withstand the pressures of future temperature increases. Our pilot scheme is kind of starting in Islington. We're going to move on to the whole of London and then across the UK when it comes to the projects that we're working on. We've touched upon this already. I actually think this is out of date now. I think it's more than 1 in 5 homes that dangerously overheat in the UK. Over 2,000 people died as a result, or it was exacerbated by overheating issues. It's predominantly people with heart disease, respiratory issues. And on the death certificate, you never say overheating. It's all the issues associated to that. And we're trying to get that changed as well. So the people we're talking about are people with heart conditions, respiratory issues, people generally with underlying health problems, homeless people, marginalised communities, people, for instance, who don't have access to green space. We're talking about young people. I worked on a Children's Day Centre project where they had to shut down the Children's Day Centre for 2 weeks because it was too hot. And then they introduced temporary cooling measures that were costing £1,000 per week to run. Focusing on people with disabilities and, of course, the elderly in care homes. We're expecting, or this again might be out of date, we're expecting that 7,000 excess deaths will occur in the UK by 2040. We actually think that's actually going to increase if we don't do anything about it now. So what we do, at the moment we're at the raising awareness stage. We've got our own social media channels, we've got article writers, volunteers across lots of universities and sustainability consultancies. We've got a website that's set up at the moment. We're running 2 projects. One is called Shade Islington. Shade Islington is about getting children involved and thinking about what their future looks like in terms of adaptation. I had to stand up in front of a group of head teachers of all the secondary schools in Islington. I thought I was in detention. We've now got a competition going that is running until September, which is getting children to think about their own school, why it overheats, and thinking about solutions. It's quite a positive competition. And then secondly, thinking about the individual in their community that might be most at risk of heat stress, and getting them to think about 2022 heat wave, and maybe thinking about them on the personal level, the human level of what the impact is, not just your own home. And we're getting them to think creatively about it. So they can use dance lessons, they can use drama, essays, poetry, not just DT or architecture. It's a way to get children to respond across the board so that no one's left behind. We're influencing change. Shade UK are part of a number of working groups that are we're part of some working groups with Arup, where we're discussing urban heat island effect. There's a program at the moment called Climate Care through UCL, and they're looking at understanding the metabolic rates. Why do older people feel the cold a lot more? And actually, just by turning up the temperatures, are we actually putting them at risk of other things? And there's other influences that we're trying to get involved in. Working with Islington Council on their new SPD, supplementary planning document, to make sure that when you're looking at these retrofit measures, you're including shading in the conversation, not just solar panels, not just the measures that are about energy efficiency. We're also talking about external shutters, so that you can avoid going through planning if you meet these certain rules. Because we think that's one of the major barriers for homeowners is thinking, I'm not going to put external shutters on, I'm not going to put a green roof on, I'm not going to do any this, that, the other, because you have to jump through so many hoops, and obviously there's a cost associated to that. And the ultimate idea is to get rid of this idea that we jump straight to cooling. We go to passive measures first, rather than jumping straight to putting air conditioning in. I've stole this from WhatG, they might tell me off if anyone's here from that architect firm. Again, with Shade Islington and other projects, we're trying to get people to reimagine what our streets look like, what our facades look like. The tower blocks that are complete concrete with only single aspect windows. Can that change? So we're at that stage where we're trying to get people to reimagine what London looks like, what our streets look like. Why do we have to consider heritage as such up here when sustainability is down here? We need to bridge that gap. If we can come away with anything today, that'd be great. Finally, I'll leave on this. This is our theory of change. I don't know how to run a charity. I've just set it up. I'm hoping people will help me out with it. I got told to set up the theory of change, which has been really, really useful. Again, I steal stuff, so we've got our ultimate goal is to have 0 deaths from overheating, which is definitely copied from Crisis, the homeless charity. It's a goal that we're going to struggle to meet, but by God, we should try and get there. And these are all the different things. Check out our website, sign up on Instagram, LinkedIn. Jobs are good.
Thank you, Andy. Okay, and last but definitely not least, we have Arup's own Antonietta Cantor, who is an engineer who works very sort of in-depth on overheating issues and retrofit issues. Over to you, Antonietta.
Thank you, everyone. I am a senior engineer in the Sustainability and Building Performance team in Arup, and we've carried out this work last year for the Climate Change Committee in the UK. Their ask was to snap a picture of the current situation for existing UK homes, how much they do overheat now, how much they will overheat in the future, and what can we do to reduce this risk for the whole country, for the whole housing stock. So it was quite a challenging task because it was all based on modeling, not real data. So we had to model all of the houses and flats and all of the homes in the UK. So we started by selecting a few variables that we thought would affect the results and the overheating risk. So we looked at 6 different archetypes, which represent mostly the housing stock in the UK. We looked at 3 weather scenarios: the current weather, the 2 degrees global warming, and a 4 degrees global warming scenario. And then we tried to map the housing stock, splitting it into 5 key geographical areas, which were the 5 key climatic areas in the UK. So you see we had a location for Scotland, one for Northern England and Ireland, which have a similar climate, one for Wales and Midlands, one for south of England, and one specific for London, which is obviously the hottest place in the country at the moment. So by using parametric modeling, which is a very fun tool for modeling, to model as many things as possible in one go, we modeled over 2,400 case studies to try and map as much as possible of the housing stock. And on your right-hand side, you can see a picture that summarizes the results. So you can see the different climatic areas and how the more red, the more bad, the worse the overheating risk was. You can see that if we look at Scotland, which is the bottom bit, at the moment there's no risk for overheating. But if we look at the 4 degrees global warming scenario, even in Scotland, we will have homes that will overheat. So it's quite worrying if you think about it. Like, Scotland is meant to be a really cold place. It's not anymore. I was in Scotland last year in May, and we had 25 degrees for 5 days. So it's getting there, unfortunately. But if we look at London, which is the 3rd one from the top, you can see that it's all orange now, which means already there's a risk. And if we look at the 4 degrees global warming, basically every home in London will be overheating. This is based on the current guidance on overheating assessment, which is under review partially, but it's the only tool we have at the moment. So it might depict a very bad, like, worst case scenario, but it's still quite realistic. Like, probably the percentages might change if we change the assessment tool, but the general picture would be the same. So when we looked at the data, 2,400 case studies, we identified the key factors that would affect overheating in a home. The first one was location, which I've shown already. London was the worst, Scotland was the best case. But also the archetype had a really, really big impact. So the homes that overheat the most are the smallest, denser types of homes. So the smaller the flat, the more people in one room or in one place, the hotter, which is quite logical. But also we found that roof insulation is one of the easy wins that we can do on every house, which will reduce the temperature in the top floor of the house and will have a dual benefit of reducing the heating demand in winter and reducing the overheating in summer. So this is a no-brainer. You have to insulate your roof. External wall insulation was a little bit less easy and straightforward. What we noticed was that if we add insulation, so the houses that had more insulation but had really good ventilation were actually performing better, so they had less overheating risk. But in smaller flats where ventilation was poor, you had small windows or you were in a noisy environment, so you couldn't open that much, having really good insulation on walls was actually counter-effective. So you would basically trap in the heat inside the flat and you wouldn't let it go anywhere. So insulation is one to be really careful about, especially when we go and retrofit homes. When we add insulation, which is obviously a good thing for energy efficiency, we need to make sure that we provide enough ventilation through windows. We have big openings and they work effectively to cross ventilation and things like that. And then, as I just said, window openability is really, really key. Regardless of the architect, the location, any other factor, good natural ventilation will reduce your overheating. So we need to allow for bigger window open areas. At the moment, we see a lot of flats, especially the newer ones, have like huge windows, which you can only open for like 20%. And this is the worst possible window that you can have in a flat to cope with overheating, because you get a lot of solar gain, but you can't actually let the heat out. And then finally, another obvious one, room orientation. We found that west-facing living rooms and east-facing bedrooms were the worst performing, which is kind of obvious. So then we looked at interventions. What can we do to reduce this risk? We split the interventions between flats and houses. We actually looked at 5 different packages, going from the cheapest and easiest things to install up to the more expensive and complex interventions, which were actually the most effective. The 5th package was actually installing active cooling wherever nothing else could work. So this is the 4th package that I'm showing here, which is the most expensive and most effective passive strategies. So on flats, we have having really big window openings, like actually openable areas rather than actual windows, and external shutters were by far the most effective measure that you could put on a flat, because that way you stop the heat from coming before he enters the flat. Ceiling fans are not a natural passive strategy, but they are a very low energy one, and we found that actually they can contribute a lot in reducing the perceived temperature in the flat. So in flats where you don't have the cross ventilation, they can really help circulate air and make you feel cooler even if the temperature is not that cold. On houses, I've mentioned the roof insulation, which is really effective. Again, external shutters are really important, and windows, but also we found that using reflective paint, both for roofs and walls, is actually quite good, and it can reduce the temperature quite significantly. Obviously, the more wall you have, the more impact this intervention will have. So a detached house will have more impact than a terraced house. The final task of the work was to look at the cost. How much would it cost for the whole country if we were to intervene and reduce the overheating risk for all of the homes? So you can see the cost for the 3 weather scenarios, and this is counting only up to package 4, so just the passive and low energy interventions. And you can see that the numbers go up to over £1 billion if we get to the 4 degrees global warming. But in that situation, even by spending over 1 billion, we will still have 90% of the homes not passing the assessment, still overheating. And that's because even with the best passive strategies, you still would have really high temperatures, which is really alarming. We really need to stop before we get there. But what also is shown on this graph is there's 4 different colors. You see the red bit is the cost for pure overheating mitigation interventions, but the violet and the blue represent costs that will actually be needed anyway if you're retrofitting a home. So if you're replacing a windows, for example, because it's old and it's broken, you may as well replace it with one that has got better performance, it's got a bigger openable area. So it's not actually the full cost of the window that is for the overheating. So it's quite a big cost, and it's still like something that it doesn't solve the problem completely. Additionally to this, what we can do is actually implement some operational interventions. So as Sue was mentioning earlier, trying to dress appropriately, try to adapt and our sense of comfort try to accept higher temperature that we think might not be comfortable at this point in time. But if we look at Italy, Spain, Greece, they definitely are comfortable with 28 to 30 degrees. So finally, recommendations from the report were split into 3 categories. We think this is a problem for building designers, but it's not only us that need to commit to the change. We definitely need to commit to provide more natural ventilation and look at new or more traditional Mediterranean ways of designing buildings, like shutters we've mentioned, or shadings, and so on. But also we need the help from urban planners to make our cities cooler, less noisy, less polluted, so that we can actually operate our buildings in a better way to make them comfortable. And also we need the help of policymakers in adopt a more holistic approach to retrofit. As I mentioned earlier, when we do add insulation, we need to make sure we're checking the summer comfort as well at the same time. We need to promote public information campaigns and also introduce regulation to limit the use of cooling is another important one, because cooling it could seem an easy win, but it's got a lot of really negative impacts. It's got a lot of embodied carbon, but more relevant for this topic is if you have a cooling system, it will reject hot in the urban environment, which will make the urban environment even hotter and hotter and hotter. So we are just not solving the problem. So yes, I think that's it from me. Thank you very much.
In a moment. I'm going to have one kick-off question from one of our speakers whilst you're formulating your own questions quickly. And I think just the one I'm going to pick is actually for Sachin. So my question for you to get things going is, are there cities out there now which could be considered as climate or cultural analogues for London and the UK? Who should we be looking to? What should we be doing instead?
Great question. Can you all hear me? I think I get asked this question quite a lot. It can be quite difficult to answer because if a climatologist were to answer this question, they could get quite detailed. But I can take some liberties and say a city like Rotterdam has a similar climate, similar location, and one of the great things Rotterdam has done is committed to have cool spaces at 300 meters walking distance for everybody, and particularly using nature as a way of cooling, so tree cover, water, and I think thanks for making the point for cool cities, because no matter how much you intervene in buildings, I think intervening in cities is also important, because that's what creates the environment that buildings sit in. So having so deep paving strategies where you actually get rid of hard pavement and replace it with soft earth, green surfaces, that will not only make the urban environment more comfortable, but also reduce the heating load on buildings.
Thank you, Sachin.
Can I have a word on that one?
Sure. Oh, is this not working? Is this one working? Yes. Sue, you've got your mic. You can.
I got my mic.
Yeah.
Okay. In 2004, the very brilliant mathematician, Jake Hacker, of Arup, did a wonderful study. Did everybody remember that? Beating the Heat. You can still get it online.
It's on Becci's timeline.
Yeah, okay, yeah. And it's wonderful because it shows that by 2030, and he's pretty bang on, the London climate will be like Marseille. So you've got to look to Marseille, see how they modify the heat down there and copy from them. So that was a brilliant one. Check it out, Beating the Heat.
Thank you, Sue. Sometimes the old ones are the best ones. I think that was from 2005.
2005, okay.
Any other questions? Sorry, John has the roving mic, so look for John and me.
Thank you. First, a comment. 4 degrees seems to have fallen off the lips of people very glibly, and it does mean that half the world around the equator is uninhabitable. So let's bear that in mind. And I will ask the question, which is, what do people think about twinning? I've been trying to get the Catholic Church to twin with Lagos and with churches in, say, Luzerne, places that are really at the front line of climate change. Do you think that for your shading thing, that you could do the same strategy? And finally, you had a point about the Arabs, about what about green roofs? That seems to have fallen off the agenda.
Thank you for your question. And could you just introduce yourself as well?
I'm Chet from Peabody.
Thank you. So I think maybe the first one might be, yes, it's getting hot in London, but it's a lot hotter in other places. Any views on that from the panel? And then we can explore some of the other questions from the attendee.
I hate to say this, but interrupt again. We have got this conference called Comfort at the Extremes, right? And we've had 3, Dubai, Oman, Edinburgh last year, and the one this year is in Ahmedabad in December, and that's got all the cities that are at the extreme. So Ahmedabad is the hottest in India, and then we've got Australia coming. Spain is going to do the next one, Sevilla, the one in 2024. So this is all the cities bringing their extreme heat plans. So if anybody's interested, just Google www.CATE20Kate, Comfort at the Extremes, 2023.org.
Thank you, Sue. And then maybe...
Can I just mention, thanks, Polly. So I don't know if the audience are aware that the Mayor has just launched the London Climate Resilience Review, and it comes on the back of London's heat waves last year. But the important point to make is that this isn't just about a focus on summer heat waves, this is about a focus on heat all year round. And that's because we've got poorly adapted buildings and people at high risk living in these buildings, and sometimes it is hot, i.e. care homes and hospitals. But the chair of that review is going to be looking across the world. So the focus will be on London and how we can better prepare, how we can address the shocks from extreme heat, what is the cost of not doing anything around adaptation, and then come up with some recommendations. But London doesn't have all the answers, and we know there are other cities who have some really good practice, Bangladesh being a really good example. And as chair of C40, the Mayor wants to ensure that we share learning practice, and so this review will look across other global cities. I would really recommend that if you haven't seen it already, it's on the GLA's website. There is a call for evidence which closes in September, but if we do want to kind of put that suggestion in, please do, because there really is a focus on London doesn't have the answers. We're doing a lot of good stuff, but we need to look at other countries as well, and that twinning potential would be a really good recommendation. Thanks, Annette.
I like the idea of twinning too. So whether it's a sort of Shade the UK sort of twinning or a city-to-city twinning, I think that's a really exciting idea to explore. Anyone want to come in on those points?
I appreciate you would probably want to get more questions, but I mean, we're part of the Commonwealth, and if you look at the Commonwealth together, there's going to be potential massive issues around mass immigration, exacerbated by climate change issues. I don't know, are we going to leave behind all those countries that we gutted a number of years ago? Maybe that's an opportunity where we could twin in those particular countries at the moment, because that's where we do have a little bit more impact than other countries. But yeah, Shade the UK, for instance, our branding could change to Shade Islington, Shade Bangladesh, all these different types of things. We'd love to learn from others. We'd love to learn from London and move it to Manchester. There's lots of different ways in which we can learn from each other.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? Yes.
Hi, I'm Catherine Coates. I'm actually a structural engineer, but I currently work with the World Bank Building Regulation for Resilience team. So thank you so much. This is amazing. But actually, my question is for Annette. I'm a disabled person with health conditions living in a top floor Victorian flat in Lambeth. And for several years, I've tried to get permission from Lambeth to put in things like exterior shading. And they say no. And they say they will take it and make me take it off. I'm actually going to go ahead and do it at the back of my house anyway. But I guess I know the Mayor of London is a bit peculiar in that you only have certain powers. But I'm wondering, are you engaging with the different boroughs on this type of matter? Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine. And I think, yeah, I'm sorry you're experiencing such extreme issues in that flat. And I think Andy touched on the sort of heritage challenge, which might not be specific to Lambeth. So maybe Annette and then Andy on that heritage, heat risk dilemma.
Yeah. I'm really sorry. It must feel very uncomfortable. So here are some points. So the mayor's GLA is a strategic authority, and the mayor has responsibility to work across the boroughs. We have the London Plan Policy and we have the London Environment Strategy Policy. But ultimately, it is about boroughs coming up with their own policies and local regulation. But here's the good news. So yesterday I was doing a similar presentation at London Councils, which kind of brings together the boroughs. And there was a meeting of the London Environment Network directors. And Lambeth was there, by the way, and they are very, very keen on putting more money into heat. So my suggestion is lobby your MP, lobby your ward councillors, and try and get in touch with the director, the environmental director at Lambeth, and really put over your case. So they really are in tune now with this agenda, and they've just got some funding from London Councils. All the boroughs have got about 40,000, don't quote me, to do some work on adaptation. So yeah, please do approach. Obviously, the mayor will do everything he can to try and make the city adaptable. It's down to the boroughs. So lobbying is your big plug.
Thanks, Annette. And Andy, you mentioned the heritage dilemma.
Yeah, I appreciate the lobbying needs to happen, but it's just too slow. Yeah, exactly. 2 years down the line, they might have brought in some local policy. Kensington and Chelsea are actually paving the way when it comes. I can't believe I'm saying that. Kensington and Chelsea are paving the way when it comes to this new SPD that's coming out or came out, and other boroughs are trying to quickly copy it, and it provides guidance. I think I mentioned earlier about permitted development aspects of retrofit, so it gives confidence to homeowners and landlords what they can and can't do when it comes to a Georgian house versus a Victorian terrace. I think what needs to happen is that boroughs need to accelerate that process, every single one of them, so they bring that out an SPD. It can be challenged by the GLA and pushed harder, and they can learn from each other. They don't need to all make the same, do a different type of paper. One's already been done, copy it, sign it up, put it on the website, done, dusted. There isn't a massive disparity between different houses and tower blocks and across London. Let's go for it. Another thing, quite quickly, is Shade UK are doing something at the moment called 40 Degree Stories. We're trying to gather as many stories as we can of people's experiences during the heatwave last year from multiple different backgrounds. Because what we're missing here in the conversation, and that's what I'm all about, is the human level. And the individual cases that are happening, for instance yours, for instance a lady who emailed in saying she suffers from autism, and the type of autism she has is that she doesn't recognise when she should drink water or not. So she is at particular risk. I didn't know that. We're gathering these stories. It's a little bit like the little boy who was washed up on the shore of the beaches. It accelerated the process of immigration laws. Let's do the same. Let's think about the human level first rather than the degrees Celsius or the number of deaths.
Could I just add to that one? Is the terrible thing about heat is people become more violent if they get hotter. And it's a tendency, if you're getting up in, for instance, prisons, they have a lot of, you get 2 or 3 degrees like that, and you get a lot more violence between prisoners. And then you get a lot more domestic violence as well. So, the human impacts of the heat is not only on health, but it's on mental health and well-being.
Feel it in the city, can't you?
Yeah.
Economic reasons, everything.
Yeah.
Gentleman at the back, over to you.
Hi there, I'm Matt Goodridge from Kestrix. We're an AI software startup trying to bring better data to Retrofit. So you talked a lot about how you're engaging various organisations on overheating. What is the plan to engage like homeowners and the public? Because there's lots of decisions people are making, every day around like, oh, I'm changing my windows. What am I going to do? Like, how do we start to engage those individuals on the decisions that they're making now? How do we educate people when they're buying a property?
Yeah.
Like we've had EPC for many, many years. We can debate on the effectiveness of that, but
it's a great question.
how do we start talking about overheating as a real risk?
And going back to the sort of permitted development thing, you can build a flat roof extension with kind of black asphalt on the top, but you can't do a kind of white roof. It's not allowed. So, Becci, I think you might have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think it kind of rings true for retrofit in general. Actually, I think there's a massive need for a national campaign and easily digestible information about retrofit as a system change to look after overheating, to look after carbon, energy bills, also your health, air quality. We're talking a lot to the government about it. I think they know it's needed. The Chris Skidmore Energy Efficiency Review highlighted the national campaign needed on carbon, but actually I think you need to widen that out because you don't want more than one piece of information. It's just retrofit, isn't it? That's the whole point. That's why we have this event, because we want to tell everybody that it needs to be holistic and systemised. So yeah, we need to keep pushing for it. And if no one else does it, we'll just have to do it ourselves, like we always do.
So that's sort of the national picture. Annette, did you have any views at the sort of London region level?
I think that's a really important point. If you look at all the big public health campaigns, so you look at air quality, you look at smoking, just look at what's happened with Thames Water and the sewage debacle, it's been the public who've really galvanised, who've moved things, who've changed things. And so what I think that's the missing bit in heat, and we need to get that much more into the public domain, raise it up as a public health issue, Andy's made the point, heat kills, and really get the public involved. I worked on air quality for a short while when the mayor came in, particularly around schools, and it was the kids who wrote into the mayor who really started like pummeling him, where he then had to really put money into air quality, really change things. And the other big point is about data. We can't, a bit like air quality, we can't feel it, we can experience it, but we need the data, and you kind of arm the public with the data, and that really moves politicians. And so I think there's a real missing bit about making it a public health issue and getting the public involved. And this is what the Adaptation Review wants to also do, is really involve the public.
I'm going to go to Andy's views in a minute, but we did a piece of work for the GLA, which Annette alluded to, looking at schools and climate resilient schools. 98% of schools that we surveyed, and it was 60 schools, it's a fairly decent sample, said they experienced overheating, and 75% said it was significantly affecting education and activities within the school day. I mean, that's mad. That's now, that's before all of the kind of warming is going to happen. So anyway, the data, the kind of children, the people who experience these impacts needs to kind of get the messages out. Andy, quick point, and then next speaker, next question.
Yeah, a quick one. You mentioned EPCs and all that kind of stuff. At the point of sale, or at the point in which you're renting out property, why not introduce a mechanism that says you have to prove that your building does not overheat to a certain temperature? Simple, done. Why don't we invent?
I've actually got a mock-up from a presentation from years ago of a sort of like overheating risks via EPC.
Exactly, and talk to estate agents. Estate agents have become actually someone who deals with these big issues. We won't talk about it now, but you can even have retrofit plans that are passed over on the point of sale and handover. Big money is moving at that point. So if you throw an extra 200 quid because you need to do this assessment, you kind of just do it.
Good point. Nice ideas. Gentleman at the front in the navy shirt.
Hi, Paul from Arup. So thanks to the panel for a great session. I think you really articulated the why very, very clearly. I also think you did a great job on the what we need to do. The technology's there. The interesting thing was all fairly low-tech sort of stuff. So thanks, Antoinette, about that. And I think the advocacy and the need for advocacy was well articulated as well. So, but we didn't really get on the how. And I'm really thinking, you also talked about that you know, it's the most disadvantaged that are most at risk for this sort of stuff. So I'm interested in the panel's views on potential funding models to implement some of these, say, or opportunities to deal with heat. I think that's
Great
one
question.
of the big challenges.
Yeah. Antonietta.
So one initiative that was quite popular in France and is now finally landing in the UK is Energy Strong, which is a system through which basically the developer commit a sell a building on based on performance contract. So you basically the homeowner, the home buyer is paying the performance, and if the performance are not guaranteed, that they get the money back. This is applied on energy, but at the moment, but it could easily be expanded to the whole holistic retrofit strategy. So I think we definitely need some public investment, but there are systems that can make that happen more quickly if we adapt them in the right way, I think.
Sachin, we had a chat earlier about policy requirements rather than incentives. Any views on how we retrofit to reduce urban heat risk?
Yeah, I think there's two approaches I can suggest. I mean, not to repeat anything that was said before. One is to piggyback on other things. So we're not faced with only one risk. If climate is bringing in other risks as well, like flooding, droughts, wildfires. So piggyback, not take a siloed approach, so that you're looking at multiple benefits from the same interventions. And that's a segue for myself to say nature, work with nature, nature-based solutions. Nature is cheap, nature is quick to add on, and has multiple benefits. So the same interventions can create cooling effects, can reduce surface flooding, can also have social, mental health and well-being benefits, aesthetic benefits, business benefits. So think about multiple benefits and work with nature.
So systems thinking and sort of the lower cost, kind of quick win measures, perhaps.
I think, Polly, sorry, I think the other thing to say is that we don't really have a model for retrofit of the country in general, and I think I had quite a few conversations today. We were talking to DESDES, and I think they were really interested in we need to prove the benefits. So we need the data, we need to look at the vulnerability, we need to start looking at monetizable benefits. So that's productivity impacts, health impacts, and if we can start to use Treasury Green Book business case modelling to show that actually the investment pays back, then we'll start to get the government to do it. It's that simple, it has to be like that.
Lady in the white t-shirt, please. And then we'll come over.
I was just referring back to your question, really, and then what Sachin was saying about nature. And I think, you know, it's not just about various authorities providing the solution. I think we do need engagement with the public. And in order to do that, funding needs to be made available for, you know, groups to come together and communities to come together to discuss what changes they want to make. And I think nature is something which is a very easy thing to get communities to organise around, you know. I was just passing Euston Square today, and it's so sad to see the taxi rank where the trees got cut down for the HS2 temporary taxi rank. And the stumps are sitting there with the growth coming up. And it doesn't look as though they really needed to cut the trees down to get the taxi rank in, you know. So the design should have allowed for these trees that were over 150 years old,
I think
that provide shade.
The value of mature trees cannot be underestimated, can it?
Yeah.
We're just over 7:30, which was the official end time. I know we started a little bit late, so I'm going to take two more final quick questions. So this gentleman here in the middle, John, thank you, and then this person in green.
Who has been
Oh, you had your hand up for ages. If they're quick, we can fit three in, so you've got an incentive.
Thank you firstly to the panel for a really interesting, wide-ranging discussion. So my name's Ed Howell, I'm a researcher from a company called DG Cities. It's an observation and a question. So one of the observations is, it feels like in the absence of policy, it falls off onto the community to take action. And I think my observation of current policy in this space is that it's not entirely comprehensible, that there's real things or evidence of practice happening. Second question is, in work that, or the question really is, in work that we've done on retrofit in hard-to-treat and hard-to-decarbonise homes, so the very, very complex archetypes or properties, it often appears to me that the private rental sector, or the landlords in particular, are very absent from the discussion about retrofit, and it's falling on vulnerable occupants, individuals with no agency to make change, to experience heat. And I'd really like to understand a bit more from the panel about what can be done for that particular part of the housing sector. For private landlords, what can we do to emphasise this importance of retrofit around heat? Because it seems to be like an absence. We haven't really talked about it.
It's a great point. Let's hold that thought. We'll take your question and we'll kind of take all three. The panel can consider all three. Yeah, we'll take her too. But we'll take all three and then the panel can consider which ones they prefer to answer.
Thank you. Dermot Barnes from XCO2. And two things. Given the urgency of the challenge that people face on a daily basis, I'm just wondering that the planning context is for permanent, anything that permanently changes a building. So when you do something that has a long-term impact on the visual space. So what I'm wondering is why we couldn't mobilize behind temporary solutions. So at a very practical level, at a very community level, you can find solutions which can be hung, maybe inelegantly, but quite practically on the outside of windows, and then can be undone at the end of the heating season. So, that's a practical thing which can be done and gets us over the hump of policy. The second thing I just want to very quickly ask is, has any of the modelling that you guys did through this, has it looked at any of the impacts of high decrement insulants? So, insulants that delay the speed of the admission of heat into a building, and what that impact is on nighttime cooling. So natural high-density insulants.
Two questions there, both really interesting. John, if you don't mind taking this third and final question over here, and then panel, you think about which ones you want to answer, and then we can have a drink very quickly. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Athena Pechu, and I'm a PhD student in the Bartlett Institute for Environmental Design and Engineering. I just want to go back to the human factor in the equation. And I just want to ask, because you work work with communities. I know there's huge research in the physiological aspect of adaptation, but my special interest is what is the behavioral space? It seems to me that when we're working on the context, we're working purely in assumptions about the cultural contexts and what are the real behaviors that people have, for example, in a multicultural London. And how is this connected to retrofit of, a social housing that is not?
Fantastic question. Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so let's start with, which part of the built environment is the least easy to influence and make change? Is it the private rented sector? And how do you get them?
I can answer that quickly. I think that the private rented sector, I hope the answer might be decent homes too, because actually I think that overheating is part of decency. I think it sort of fits the definition. It's the kind of, I think comfort is one of the definitions of a decent home, and there is a bit of stuff around the health, I can never remember the health and safety part of that. So that's currently in consultation, and previously decent homes was only for the social housing sector, but the new decent homes will include private rentals. So that's probably the soonest lever we've got nationally. Otherwise, I think you're right, it's an incredibly difficult sector to police. And we are talking to people about it, but I don't know. Yeah.
Okay.
Live.
Any further thoughts on that? We'll discuss over a drink. Over here now to the 2 points. One was about the temporary nature of measures, which I really like, and also a particular kind of insulation. Any views on the temporary nature of measures to reduce urban heat risk? Maybe Andy? Shade?
No, I think it's brilliant. We sometimes jump straight to the complicated and forget the things that you can do. For instance, the work we've done before where there were some overheating issues on some community centres, actually just bringing in these flags, a bit like you see at festivals, in the summer and then taking them back in the winter, and it's completely shaded the building. They weren't able to put in trees, and it was quite expensive to do so. The same with temporary shutters or certain types of blinds or louvers, why we don't have to always jump straight to the thing that needs planning.
Just don't take them down.
Just don't, yeah.
Sachin, can you hold that thought till after with drinks? Okay. And then maybe Antonietta about this particular kind of insulation, sort of thermal mask.
So you were talking about nighttime ventilation.
Oh, she can do that, yeah.
Nighttime cooling. Maybe it's a Sue Roth question.
Yeah, no, what you've highlighted is the absolute fundamental importance of nighttime cooling of mass and any way to do it. And the one thing is you didn't put Velux windows in the top of roofs to dump heat out of. That's a really good way of providing a very rapid dump of heat out through the roof and then use that air to nighttime ventilate inside.
Yeah, so in the modeling we did, we obviously had to simplify the number of geometries and typologies, so we couldn't model everything, but nighttime ventilation was an assumption we made on all flats wherever it was feasible for security reasons and so on. What we also modeled was a difference between an informed occupant and an uninformed occupant. So, for example, when we modeled the uninformed occupants, we didn't model the nighttime ventilation, and that was creating a massive difference in the actual comfort level. So, yes, I think that also probably responds to another question we had earlier about the comfort. There are different behaviors. I think it would be really important if we started to advertise more what these behavior, the best behavior could be. Because I see, like, when there's an heat wave in London, I see 90% of the people just open the windows, even if it's 35 degrees outside, which is not the right thing to do. So we need to learn how to cope with the new climate, because this is new for London, it's new for the UK. We need to learn how to manage it. And I think education and general awareness of what good behavior is quite important.
And I think, so we don't forget your question, I think as well as, we need to understand how people use their homes and the spaces around their homes to get a better understanding of how effective some of these measures might be or not.
But I think the key point is enabling the building to be operated properly. At the moment, the new flats that we see are built in London, they cannot be operated properly. So if you build a flat like that, you can have the most informed and educated occupants. They will overheat regardless. If we install openable windows of the right size in the right place, we have external shadings, then how many people are there or how much they use the building, they will have the flexibility of operating.
It will be intuitive and sort of logical. We can continue this chat afterwards, but thank you all for sticking around a bit longer than originally intended, but we did start a bit later. It's been really interesting. It's a lot to think about. Quick parting shot, if people could just go away now and do one thing to move things along, what would you recommend, Sue?
Okay, there is one thing you have to do. It's why people died in the 95 heat wave in Chicago. They were so frightened of opening the doors and windows. They died because they couldn't afford the air conditioning on a chair in the middle of the room. Put good security grills, so you can open the windows, so people are not too afraid to
security,
make themselves comfortable.
Annette, what's your one thing you would ask people to go out and do?
Talk to each other, talk to your neighbours, really raise the bar, educate people about heat when it's hot, talk about kind of what some simple measures that can be taken to do heat, and then kind of we can build a community of kind of this public health campaign around managing heat.
Fantastic. Antonietta?
Travel
to other places.
To a warm country. Yeah. See how they live.
Research. I'll try. Andy?
Stop heritage consultants having so much power.
I like that.
Popular. Sachin?
People inhabit buildings, but buildings inhabit cities. So expand your definition of built environment. Intervene in the public realm. You could do amazing temporary stuff. You could do amazing stuff with nature. You can do a lot of things that have an impact on a larger number of people. And also the physiological experience of walking is something that is in high heat, is something that causes a lot of deaths as well. So think about the city as a building. Expand the definition of built environment.
Excellent. And Becci?
I think similar to Annette, so do the stuff to your home, put the sheet outside your window, tell your neighbours to do it, tell them how to open their windows, and show off the individual action to drive the collective action while we get round to doing the health campaign
the big stuff at scale. Okay, fantastic. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy a drink. Stick around.
I was saying it was very interesting, the whole thing. I'm going to send you all something on education done in Seville. Seville is our next. I'll send you something for Comfort at the Extreme. Come to Kate in December.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
I will.